Haunting in Venice is directed by Kenneth Branagh and stars Kenneth Branagh, Kelly Riley, Michelle Yeoh, and among others. And this is the third film in the series of films that feature the detective known as Hercule Poirot. And in this story, it deals with him in Venice, where he's essentially going to a Halloween party that's going on, and he's come to investigate the death of a mysterious young girl. And along the way, he's starting to notice some weird things that are happening inside this house that are happening. And it's from the trailers, it makes it seem like it's kind of going into more supernatural territory for the first time, since the other two films were more of a straight detective film. But as it goes along, he starts to unravel a lot more of what's happening, and it kind of goes into some different twists and turns of how it plays out. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, this film was directed by Kenneth Branagh, who I've been an avid fan of from a lot of films that he's both acted in and also directed in. When he directed the other films, The Murder on the Orient Express and Death on the Nile, I really got into his character as Hercule Poirot, as the detective, and the way that he was able to blend in a lot of great stuff with him being a smart detective and the humor and everything that worked in those films. It was just such a fascinating character study, and the murder mystery stuff that was happening in those two films really got my attention the most, especially with the star-studded cast they had with the other two. And so, even though it was kind of a step below with Death on the Nile from last year that came out, compared to the first movie, I still thought that the other two were still great with how they were able to blend in all these great, fantastic all-star casts, and also keeping me interested with how the murder mysteries play out, and the ways that also make a good double feature with the current Knives Out films with the whole whodunit aspect. And so going into this film, it got me really interested because from the trailers, it seemed like they were going in a different direction with how they were possibly going with a supernatural route, as it's implied, but knowing that this was also based on the series of novels that were by Agatha Christie, it just seemed like it really made me curious if they were going to either take that kind of route or do something else. I won't spoil what happens, but after upon seeing the film, I thought that was actually just a great direction of its own, because I thought this so far has been the best of the three films. I think that not only does it really capture the spookiness of with the atmosphere, with it being set in Venice, and also with it primarily set at this house where it's a lot more claustrophobic, and it kind of has like a more serious kind of route, like Clue, basically. And even though this doesn't have quite as much of a big cast this time, it still has some familiar faces like Tina Fey, Kelly Riley, who, if you know from Yellowstone, and just among others. And also, surprisingly, they have the guy from the 50 Shades movies, Jamie Dornan. And to get my pros out of the way, I thought the cast in this were all fantastic. You know, I'm not really the biggest Tina Fey fan, but her playing this kind of like different type of against type role, kind of like what Russell Brand did in the Death on the Nile. It's kind of interesting seeing these movies kind of taking comedic actors and giving them some serious roles like this, because she plays it off really well with her and her chemistry with Hercule in this, and I couldn't. It was just really interesting to see her take this kind of performance, and she really worked with it. And then the other cast too that really stood out, I thought, were Jamie Dornan as the doctor, and then you also had Kelly Riley, and also Michelle Yeoh is also in this as well, and she has one of the best scenes early in the film where she's doing kind of this thing where she's able to talk to spirits and stuff. And I thought she was really great. It's just always great to see Michelle Yeoh. And then the rest of the pros I got to admit too is the way that the direction in this, it really sticks to that kind of landing where Branagh is able to make it feel a lot more kind of like old school Hollywood, kind of like he did in the other two films, where you get like close-ups of things, and the production design is really top notch with it being in the 40s and everything. And this whole kind of feeling of being lost inside this house and stuff, it definitely gave me that kind of claustrophobic feel with, you know, where every corner or every room is always like a different thing that the characters are rabbing into, and it just really it gets you in that kind of unsettling mood after a while. And then on top of that, one of the biggest surprises is it kind of takes a psychological route that I was really surprised with, because basically throughout the film, Kenneth Branagh's character is basically seeing weird stuff that's happening, and it plays into the way that the story is going with how it's adding stuff about him. It's adding stuff with the mystery going on with the murder, but also it's also unraveling some stuff that we get into more added depth with his character, because throughout the entire film, he's basically been retired, and so with him getting onto this case again, it's not only having him trying to, find himself getting back into the detective field again, but also just seeing stuff that also plays into effect with how the murder gets solved and everything. If I do have to get into some of my cons, we'll have to say that one of the biggest weaknesses the movie surprisingly has is that, unlike the other films, which were straight up detective movies, this one, since it's going into that more kind of horror route, there are times where some of the, like early in the beginning and stuff, where the way that they're trying to play into some of the scares, it's really just like loud noises and stuff, or just, a couple of jump scares here and there. And so it seemed like Branagh just wasn't quite ready to really like take this character into this whole going horror route, because even though it does have a great atmosphere and everything, it just seems like they were kind of, they were having to rely more on jump scares and having to like really build tension, even though there is some tension that really builds up and you get to see some things that really play out, especially in the beginning. But I think that it really could have been, executed a lot better with how it was actually played with the scares themselves. And on top of that, unlike the other films, this one, as far as the murder mystery plot goes, it doesn't have quite as an interesting like motivation or anything with the actual person behind it. But also, it just seems like it was taking more of a backseat with the whole murder mystery plot and doing more of the other stuff on a direction standpoint that worked better for the film. And I think that's a kind of a pro kind of have with the series overall, because even though I think this is also the best film of the series that uses its pacing a lot better compared to the other two films, it does seem like the other two films at least had more interesting stuff about the murder mystery itself. And so that's in effect with it, because there is some stuff that, unfortunately, that I could kind of call throughout the film that seemed like it was a little obvious. And basically, it also doesn't help that if you kind of know at the beginning of the film where it's going with the actual plot that happens with the murder, you kind of get the idea of why all this is going on when it's revealed who the person is behind it. And so that is one of the things I've always really kind of had a problem with the series overall, is that unfortunately they always have it to where the killer reveal just seems a little too obvious in some cases, even though they do try to make it kind of hide in some areas. But it's not to say that the murder mystery itself that plays out is bad by any means. It's just, and because I was still engaged in seeing where it was going, but you could still kind of feel like, I just felt like it just wasn't quite as an interesting kind of motive, or like certain things that they add with the characters, because it also plays into some of the characters that they introduce in this film don't really get a whole lot to do. And so they even though they get interviewed and things like that, they're really just kind of there to really move the plot along. And other than some like quick backstories with them, it's kind of the same problem we have with the other films, where they're just there. Some of them are just there just to make the plot unravel. But overall, though, I will have to say though that this was still a fun time, and with that, I'm going to give the movie a high compelling grade on the Film Freaks meter. So for those of you who have also seen A Haunting in Venice and also the other films in the Hercule Poirot franchise, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.